The Arizona sky had turned the color of old bruises when Margaret Hayes finally collapsed against the canyon wall. Her husband's blood still stained the wagon seat 3 days behind her, the Apache raid having taken him and left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a gold wedding band she'd been trying to trade for water since dawn. At 6 feet tall, she'd always been called a giant among women, but now she felt small as she watched the dark-skinned warrior approach on his paint horse. His long black hair whipped in the wind that promised violence, and the rifle across his lap could end her suffering with a single shot. Before we continue with Margaret's story, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Your support truly matters and motivates us to bring you more quality content like this. I'm also curious, where are you listening from today? "Water," she croaked, holding up the ring with trembling fingers. "Please, it's all I have." The warrior dismounted in one fluid motion, his movements precise despite the brewing storm. He stood shorter than her by several inches, but his presence filled the canyon. Scars decorated his bronze chest, each one a story she couldn't read. His dark eyes studied her face, not the gold. "Keep your ring, white woman," he said in perfect English that startled her. "You need water, not empty hands." He pulled a water skin from his saddle and offered it. "I am Nako. You are on Apache land, but I see you are already a victim of this war." Margaret drank desperately, water spilling down her chin. When she finished, she met his eyes. "Margaret, my husband, they killed him. I've been walking for 3 days." "The men who killed him were not my people," Nako said quietly. "Renegades from both sides make widows every day." Thunder rumbled overhead. "This storm will be bad. Come, I have nothing to pay you with. Gold isn't what we need here. You are alive, that is enough." He glanced at the darkening sky. "We must move now." She hesitated only a moment before accepting his outstretched hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and when he helped her onto his horse, settling behind her, she felt the solid strength of him at her back. They rode hard as the first raindrops fell, heading toward a series of caves carved into the red rock. Inside the largest cave, Nako built a fire with practiced efficiency while the storm unleashed its fury outside. Lightning illuminated the canyon in violent flashes, and Margaret wrapped her arms around herself, shivering from more than cold. "Your dress is wet," Nako observed, offering her a blanket woven with intricate patterns. "There is a dry shirt in my pack. I will turn away." Margaret changed quickly, her fingers clumsy with cold and exhaustion. The shirt hung loose on her frame, but it was warm and smelled of sage smoke. When she settled by the fire, Nako had prepared a simple meal of dried meat and cornmeal cakes. They ate in silence, listening to the storm rage. Finally, Margaret spoke. "Why did you help me?" Nako stared into the flames. 6 months ago, soldiers burned my village, my wife and daughter." His jaw tightened. "They did not survive. I told myself I would hate all white people forever." He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting firelight. "But hate is a poison that kills the one who carries it. When I saw you, I saw someone who had also lost everything. I could not leave you to die." Margaret felt tears burn her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what they did." "You did not kill them. You are not responsible for all white people, just as I am not responsible for all Apache." He paused. "This land has enough ghosts. We do not need to become them too. The storm lasted 3 days. During that time, Nako taught Margaret how to find water in the desert, which plants were safe to eat, how to read the sky for weather signs. She was a quick learner, her height and strength advantages she'd always been ashamed of suddenly becoming assets. "You move like a deer," he told her on the second day as she climbed the rocks to gather prickly pear fruit. Long limbs, but graceful. She blushed at the compliment. "People always said I was too big, unwomanly. People are fools." Nako's voice was firm. "You are not too anything. You are exactly as you should be." Something shifted in her chest at those words, a loosening of a knot she'd carried her whole life. On the third night, as the storm finally began to ease, Margaret woke to find Nako standing at the cave entrance, his silhouette outlined by moonlight breaking through clouds. She approached quietly. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He didn't turn. "I dream of them. My wife, my daughter. I wake up forgetting they are gone, and then I remember, and it is like losing them again." Without thinking, Margaret placed her hand on his shoulder. He tensed at first, then slowly relaxed under her touch. "I dream of Thomas," she admitted. "Not the good times, only the moment the arrow struck him, the blood, his eyes going empty. I couldn't save him." Nako turned to face her, and in the dim light, she saw moisture on his cheeks. "We cannot save the dead, Margaret. We can only choose whether we let them take us with them, or whether we honor them by continuing to live. I don't know if I'm strong enough to live without him." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You walked 3 days through hostile territory on foot. You survived. You are stronger than you know." The air between them suddenly felt charged with something more than grief. Margaret's heart hammered in her chest. "Nako!" "I should not feel this," he whispered, but his hand didn't move from her face. "It is too soon. For both of us." "Yes," she agreed, but she leaned into his touch anyway. "Much too soon." They stood like that for a long moment, the storm's last raindrops falling outside. Two broken people finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. Finally, Nako stepped back, his hand falling away. "Tomorrow, I will take you to the nearest settlement. You can start a new life there." Margaret felt a pang of loss at his words, but she nodded. "Thank you for everything." She returned to her blanket, but sleep eluded her. She could still feel the warmth of his hand on her face, still see the way he'd looked at her in the moonlight. Something had begun between them, something neither of them was ready to name. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the desert clean. As Nako saddled his horse, Margaret felt a desperate need to delay their parting. "Teach me to shoot," she said suddenly. "Before we go, I need to know how to protect myself." Nako studied her for a moment, then nodded. He retrieved his rifle and led her to an open area. Standing behind her, he positioned her arms, his hands guiding hers on the weapon. "Breathe," he instructed, his voice low near her ear. "Feel the weight. Respect the weapon, but do not fear it. You control it, not the other way around." Margaret tried to focus on his instructions, but she was acutely aware of his chest against her back, his arms bracketing hers, his breath on her neck. When she fired, the recoil knocked her back against him, and his arms tightened to steady her. "Good," he said, but his voice had gone rough. "Very good." She turned in his arms and found his face inches from hers. Neither of them moved. The desert morning stretched around them, vast and silent. "Margaret," he said hoarsely, "if I kiss you now, I will not want to take you to that settlement. I will want to keep you with me. And if I want to be kept, The words left her mouth before she could stop them. His eyes darkened. It would be madness. You are white. I am Apache. The world would condemn us. The world already took everything from both of us. Why should we care what it thinks? She lifted her hand to his face, feeling the strong line of his jaw. I'm not saying I love you. I'm not even saying I know you. But I know I'm not ready to say goodbye. Nako's control finally broke. He kissed her with a fierce tenderness that made her knees weak, one hand tangling in her hair, while the other pressed against the small of her back, pulling her closer. She responded with equal intensity, her fingers gripping his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle beneath skin that had known too much pain. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nako rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Not forever, not yet, but stay until we both know what this is." "Yes," Margaret breathed. "Yes." They spent the next weeks in the wilderness, Nako teaching Margaret the ways of survival, while she taught him English poetry she'd memorized as a girl. She learned to track game, to move silently through brush, to read signs in disturbed earth. He learned that her laughter sounded like wind chimes, and that she sang off-key, but with full heart. At night they lay by their fires and talked of their lost loves without guilt, sharing grief that slowly began to lighten. Nako told her of his daughter's love of butterflies, of his wife's skill with healing herbs. Margaret described Thomas's kindness, his dreams of a ranch, the quiet life they'd planned. "Do you think they would approve of this?" Margaret asked one night, her head resting on Nako's shoulder as they watched stars emerge. "Of us? My wife always said life was for the living," Nako replied, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "She would want me to find joy again, even if she could not share it. Thomas proposed to me because he said I deserved someone who saw my height as a blessing, not a curse." Margaret smiled sadly. "He would like that you see me the same way." Nako tilted her face up to his. "I see a woman worth saving. No, worth standing beside. There is a difference." She kissed him then, and the kiss deepened into something more urgent. His hands moved over her with reverent care, and when she whispered, "Go slow, it hurts to hope again," he responded, "I'll die before I hurt you." Their lovemaking was tender and fierce by turns, two wounded souls finding healing in each other's arms. Afterward, as they lay tangled together under blankets, Margaret traced the scars on Nako's chest. "Each one is a story," she murmured. "Then we are both books written in pain," he replied, running his finger along a faded bruise on her ribs. "But perhaps together we can write new chapters." Their peace shattered 2 weeks later when a group of cowboys stumbled upon their camp. Margaret recognized the leader immediately, Cole Briggs, her late husband's former partner. A man with a reputation for cruelty and a grudge against all natives. "Well, well," Briggs drawled, his hand on his pistol. "Thomas's widow, living like a squaw with a savage. That inheritance you're sitting on could buy a lot of land, Mrs. Hayes. Shame you won't be alive to spend it." Margaret stepped forward, positioning herself between Nako and the guns. "I have no inheritance, Briggs. Thomas died with debts. Lying won't save your pet Indian." Briggs spat tobacco juice. "Step aside or die with him." "No." Margaret's voice rang clear. "You'll have to go through me." Nako tried to push her behind him, but she held firm. "Margaret, do not—" "Together," she said firmly, not taking her eyes off Briggs. "That's what you said. Together." Briggs laughed. "How touching. Boys, kill them both." The canyon erupted in gunfire. Nako moved like lightning, pushing Margaret behind a rock formation while returning fire with deadly accuracy. She grabbed the rifle he'd taught her to use and began shooting, surprising herself with her steadiness under pressure. Two of Briggs's men fell quickly. The others scattered for cover, and suddenly it was a standoff, bullets ricocheting off stone while the sun beat down mercilessly. "There's only two of them!" Briggs shouted. "Rush them!" As three men charged their position, Margaret saw Nako take a bullet to the shoulder. He staggered, but kept firing, taking down one attacker. She shot another, but the third was nearly upon them when she heard the thunder of approaching horses. A group of Apache warriors crested the ridge. Led by an older man with a face like carved stone, they descended on Briggs's remaining men with swift efficiency, ending the fight in moments. The leader approached Nako, speaking rapidly in Apache. Nako responded, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Margaret understood none of the words but caught the concerned looks cast her way. Finally, the leader turned to her. "I am Ahiga, war chief of Nako's band. He says you fought beside him." "Yes," Margaret said simply. Ahiga studied her with intense, dark eyes. "You are very tall for a woman." "I am aware." A hint of amusement crossed his stern face. "Come, we will treat his wound, and you will tell me how my best scout came to take up with a white woman." At the Apache camp, Margaret was allowed to tend Nako's shoulder, while the tribe watched with wary curiosity. She cleaned and bound the wound with steady hands, though her heart raced with fear for him. "The bullet passed through," she told him quietly. "You'll heal, but you need to rest." "I need to speak to Ahiga about your safety," Nako countered, trying to rise. She pushed him back down gently but firmly. "You'll speak to no one until you're bandaged. Now hold still before I tie you to this post." Despite his pain, Nako smiled. "You order me around like a wife." Margaret's hands stilled. "Is that what I am? What I could be?" His good hand caught hers. "If you would have me, if you would accept this life, this people who will not always welcome you, if you can be happy in a world that is not the one you were born to." "I was born to a world that told me I was too much," Margaret said fiercely. "Too tall, too strong, too outspoken. You gave me a world where those things make me valuable. Where would I rather be?" That evening, as the tribe gathered around fires, Ahiga called Margaret forward. She stood before them, conscious of being the only white face among dozens. "You fought beside one of our own," Ahiga said. "You did not run when death came. Nako tells me you wish to stay among us." "I do," Margaret said clearly, "if you'll have me." An older woman stepped forward, her face weathered but kind. "I am Mosca, Nako's mother. My son has been dead inside since he lost his family. Today I saw him smile. For that alone, you are welcome." Other voices rose in agreement, though some remained silent, their disapproval evident. Ahiga raised his hand for quiet. "You will be tested," he told Margaret. "This life is hard. You must prove your worth not with words, but with actions. Can you do this?" "Yes," Margaret said without hesitation. "Then we will see what you are made of, tall woman." The following months were the hardest of Margaret's life. She learned to tan hides, to weave baskets, to grind corn in the traditional way. Her hands, soft from a life of relative ease, became calloused and strong. Some women helped her patiently. Others made her tasks deliberately difficult, testing her resolve. Nako recovered from his wound and resumed his duties as a scout. But every night, he returned to the dwelling they now shared, a small but comfortable home on the edge of camp. There, away from watching eyes, they built a life together, piece by piece. 3 weeks after, Margaret arrived at the Apache camp. Maska woke her before dawn with urgent whispers. "Come, Hosea. Today you hunt with the women. No complaints, no questions. Bring only your knife and your courage." Margaret dressed quickly in the duskin clothing the tribe had given her fingers still clumsy with the unfamiliar fastenings. Outside, 5 Apache women waited on horseback, their faces unreadable in the pre-dawn darkness. She recognized them. Kimimela, the youngest and most skeptical of her presence. Dakota, who'd shown her kindness, and 3 others who'd barely spoken to her. "Can you ride?" Kimimela asked, her tone challenging. "Yes," Margaret replied, approaching the paint horse they'd brought for her. In truth, she'd only ridden side saddle in her previous life, but she'd watched Nako mount his horse enough times to understand the mechanics. She swung herself up with less grace than she'd hoped, but she made it. Kimimela's lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "We'll see if White Woman can keep up." They rode hard into the rising sun, the horse's hooves thundering across hard-packed earth. Margaret's thighs screamed in protest, unused to riding astride, but she gritted her teeth and held on. The women didn't slow for her, didn't check to see if she followed. This was the test Maska had warned her about. After an hour, they reached a narrow canyon where deer tracks marked the dust. The women dismounted silently, and Margaret followed suit, her legs trembling as her feet hit the ground. She forced herself to stand straight, refusing to show weakness. Dakota approached her, speaking in a low voice. "The deer come through this canyon at sunrise to drink. We will split into 2 groups. You will come with Kimimela and me. We drive the deer toward the others. Understand?" "Yes," Margaret whispered. "If you make noise, if you move too fast, if you fail, we all go home empty-handed. Our children go hungry because of the White Woman who cannot learn our ways." Kimimela's eyes were hard. "Can you do this?" Margaret met her gaze steadily. "I can." They positioned themselves along the canyon wall, crouching among rocks and scrub brush. Margaret's heart pounded so loudly, she was certain it would scare away every animal for miles. Her legs cramped, her back ached, but she didn't move. She barely breathed. The sun climbed higher. Sweat rolled down her spine. A scorpion crawled across her boot, and she forced herself to remain absolutely still until it passed. Beside her, Kimimela watched with narrowed eyes, waiting for her to break. Then she heard it, the soft sound of hooves on stone, the rustle of bodies moving through brush. 3 deer emerged from the canyon's bend, a doe and 2 yearlings, their heads down as they moved toward water. Kimimela raised her hand slowly. Margaret watched, every muscle tense. When Kimimela's hand dropped, they moved as one, not running, but walking steadily, arms spread wide, creating a wall of human presence that drove the deer forward, toward where the other women waited. The deer bolted, running straight into the ambush. Arrows flew, and 2 of the 3 animals fell. The doe escaped, but the yearlings would feed many families. As the women gathered around their kill, Kimimela turned to Margaret. "You did not fail." It wasn't quite approval, but it wasn't condemnation either. Margaret would take it. The butchering was brutal work. Margaret had never seen an animal killed and processed before, had never pushed her hands into warm body cavities to remove organs, had never felt blood dry, sticky on her arms. Her stomach churned, but she watched carefully, learning where to cut, how to separate hide from meat, which parts were precious and which were discarded. "Your hands shake," Kimimela observed. "Yes," Margaret admitted. "This is new to me, but I'm learning." "Why?" The question was sharp, direct. "Why stay here and do this hard work? You could go back to your people, live easy." Margaret paused, her bloody hands resting on the deer's flank. "Because easy isn't the same as right. Because your son," she nodded toward where Nako was visible, in the distance, returning from his scout, "saw me when I was dying and chose to help me instead of hate me. Because I was told my whole life I was wrong for being strong, for being tall, for not fitting into pretty dresses and proper society. Here, my strength matters. Here I can be useful." Kimimela studied her for a long moment. "You love him." "I do. He loved another before you. A wife, a daughter. They died badly." "I know." Margaret resumed her work, cutting carefully. "I had a husband too. He died in my arms." "I understand grief." She began a bit of cold voice. "Do you understand that when soldiers killed Nako's family, they wore the same uniform as the men who protect your people? Do you understand that every time he looks at your white skin, he might remember?" Margaret's hands stilled. "Yes," she said quietly. "I understand that every day he chooses to love me, despite what people like me took from him, is an act of profound courage. I understand that I can never repay that, can never make up for what was done, but I can honor it by becoming someone worthy of that choice." Kimimela was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Good answer, white woman. Maybe you understand more than I thought." They loaded the meat onto the horses and began the journey back. Margaret's body screamed with exhaustion, every muscle protesting. But when they crested the ridge and saw the camp below, she felt a fierce pride burning in her chest. She had done this. She had kept up, had stayed silent when needed, had conquered her squeamishness and contributed to the tribe's survival. Nako was waiting when they rode in, his eyes finding her immediately. She must have looked a sight, covered in blood and dirt, swaying with exhaustion, but grinning like a fool. "You hunted," he said, a smile playing at his lips. "I hunted," she confirmed. That night, as she soaked her aching muscles in the stream, under cover of darkness, Nako kept watch nearby. "The women are talking," he told her. "Kimimela says you did not complain, did not fail." This is high praise from her. "She hates me," Margaret said, wincing as she moved her sore shoulders. "She fears you," Nako corrected. "She fears that I will be hurt again. But today you showed her you are willing to suffer for this life, not just speak pretty words about it." Margaret emerged from the water, wrapping herself in a blanket. "I would suffer more than sore muscles for this life, Nako. For you." He pulled her close, and she rested against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I know," he murmured. "That is what terrifies me. You should not have to suffer at all." "Everyone suffers," Margaret replied. "The question is whether the suffering has meaning. Mine does." 2 weeks later, Margaret woke to find the camp in chaos. Children were crying, women rushing between dwellings, and the men gathered in tight, angry clusters. She found Nako strapping on weapons, his face grim. "What's happening?" "Soldiers took children from the eastern camp," he said shortly. "Took them to a boarding school, cut their hair, forbade them to speak our language, beat them for practicing our ways. 3 children. One of them was Takota's nephew." Margaret's blood ran cold. She'd heard of the boarding schools, the government's attempt to civilize native children by stripping away their culture. "What will you do?" "Get them back." Nako checked his rifle. "Ihiga is leading a war party. We leave within the hour. I'm coming with you." Nako turned sharply. "No, this will be dangerous. There will be shooting." "I can shoot. You taught me." Margaret grabbed his arm. "Nako, those are children. If I can help bring them home." "The answer is no." His voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. "You will stay here where it is safe." Something hot and angry flared in Margaret's chest. "I'm not property, Nako. I'm a person, and I'm telling you I'm coming." They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with tension. Finally, Ahiga's voice cut through their standoff. "Let her come." Both turned to find the war chief watching them. "If she slows us down, we will leave her behind," Ahiga continued. "But she fights well. I saw this when the cowboys came. We may need every gun." Nako's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Stay close to me. Do exactly as I say. If I tell you to run, you run." "Agreed," Margaret said, though she had no intention of running if it meant leaving him behind. They rode hard for 3 hours, following tracks that led toward the boarding school. It was housed in an old mission, surrounded by walls that had once kept raiders out and now kept children in. As they approached under cover of darkness, Margaret felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Ahiga gathered them in a grove of cottonwoods. 6 guards. They rotate every 4 hours. The children are kept in the east wing, barred windows. We go in quietly, get the children, and leave. No killing unless necessary. Margaret checked her rifle with shaking hands. Nako covered her hands with his own, steadying them. "Breathe," he whispered. "You are stronger than your fear." They split into 3 groups. Margaret went with Nako and 2 others, tasked with reaching the children's dormitory, while Ahiga's group disabled the guards and the 3rd group secured horses for escape. Moving through the darkness, Margaret felt her senses heighten. Every sound seemed magnified. The crunch of gravel underfoot, the distant bark of a dog, her own breathing harsh in her ears. They reached the wall, and Nako boosted her up first, her height an advantage in reaching the top. She pulled herself over and dropped silently on the other side, then helped the others. The dormitory was across a courtyard, and they had to cross open ground. Margaret's pulse thundered in her ears as they ran, low and fast, pressing themselves against the building's wall. Nako jimmied the window lock, an easy task, as the locks were meant to keep children in, not warriors out. Inside, they found rows of small beds, perhaps 20 children sleeping fitfully. Margaret's throat tightened at the sight of their shorn hair, so different from the long braids Apache children wore. Nako moved to the beds at the far end, gently shaking 3 children awake. "Shh," he whispered in Apache. "We are taking you home." The oldest, a boy of perhaps 10, started to cry silently. "They said you would not come. They said we were forgotten." "Never," Nako promised. "Never forgotten." As they prepared to leave, a small girl in a nearby bed sat up. "Take me too," she whispered. "Please, I want to go home." Then another child sat up, and another. Within moments, they were surrounded by hopeful faces, all begging to leave. Margaret's heart shattered. They couldn't take them all. It would be too slow, too visible. But how could they leave these children behind? "We can only take 3 tonight," Nako said, his voice rough with emotion. "But we will come back. I swear it. We will come back for all of you." Liar, one boy said bitterly. You are like all adults. You promise, and you do not keep your word. Before Margaret could think, she knelt before the boy. I swear on the grave of my husband, on everything I hold sacred, we will return. Not tonight, but soon. Will you trust me? The boy stared at her white face, clearly struggling. Finally, he nodded. Bring weapons next time. Help us fight our way out. We will, Margaret promised, not sure how they would keep such an oath, but certain they would try. They left through the window with the 3 children. But as they crossed the courtyard, a guard rounded the corner. He froze, staring at them, then reached for his rifle. Margaret didn't think. She raised her own rifle and fired first, the shot going wide, but close enough to make the guard dive for cover. His shout of alarm shattered the night. Run! Nako grabbed the youngest child and sprinted for the wall. Margaret and the other warriors followed, bullets kicking up dust around their feet. Behind them, the compound erupted in chaos. Guards running, dogs barking, more gunfire. At the wall, Nako literally threw the children over to waiting hands on the other side. Margaret was the last one up, and as she reached the top, she felt a burning pain slice across her ribs. She'd been hit. She fell more than climbed down the other side, landing hard. Nako was there instantly, seeing the blood spreading across her shirt. Margaret! Later, she gasped. Run now, 10 wounds later. They ran. Margaret had never moved so fast in her life. Adrenaline overriding the pain in her side. They reached the horses and mounted in fluid motion. The children secured in front of adult riders, and then they were flying across the desert. Bullets whistling past them until they were finally out of range. They didn't stop until dawn, when they reached a hidden canyon Ahiga deemed safe. Only then did Nako pull Margaret from her horse and examine her wound. It is not deep, he said, but his hand shook as he cleaned and bandaged the graze. When I saw you fall, when I saw the blood. I'm fine, Margaret interrupted, though in truth she felt dizzy and sick. The children? Safe, scared but safe. He met her eyes, and she saw something raw and vulnerable in his face. You could have died tonight. So could you. So could any of us. She touched his face. That's what it means to fight for something that matters, Nako. You risk everything. He pulled her close, careful of her injury. I cannot lose you, he whispered fiercely. I cannot lose someone else I love to violence. Then we'll have to make sure we both survive, Margaret replied, though she knew such promises were hollow in a world so full of danger. When they returned to camp, Dakota ran to embrace her nephew, sobbing with relief. Other families gathered around, touching the children gently, welcoming them home. Maska approached Margaret, who was sitting by a fire, trying not to show how much her side hurt. You brought them back, Maska said simply. We all did, but you were hit protecting them. You bled for Apache children. Maska knelt and placed her hand over Margaret's heart. You are my daughter now, in truth as well as ceremony. No one will question your place here again. Margaret felt tears burn her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. That night, despite her injury, Margaret couldn't sleep. She kept thinking of the children they'd left behind, their hopeful faces, the boy who'd called Nako a liar. She'd made a promise, and she had no idea how to keep it. Nako found her sitting outside their dwelling, staring at the stars. Your wound pains you? My conscience pains me more. She told him about her promise. How can we get them all out, Nako? There are too many. The soldiers will be watching now. He was silent for a long time. I do not know, but we will find a way. You made a promise, and I will help you keep it. He sat beside her, taking her hand. This is what I love about you, Hasea. You see suffering and you cannot walk away, even when walking away would be wiser. Is that love or foolishness? With you, there is no difference. He smiled slightly. Come, rest. Tomorrow we will begin planning. Tonight, you heal. Over the following weeks, Margaret's wound healed, leaving a scar she wore with strange pride. Her first battle scar, proof she'd fought for something beyond herself. But the children haunted her dreams. She and Nako spent hours discussing options with Ahiga and the tribal council. A direct assault would mean war, and the tribe couldn't afford that. Sneaking them out a few at a time would take too long, and the children suffered every day. It was Kimimela who suggested the unexpected solution. What if we did not fight them? She asked one evening. What if we beat them at their own game? Explain, Ahiga commanded. The white government wants to civilize us, yes? They want us to learn their ways, speak their language, adopt their religion. What if we sent someone who already knows these things? Someone who could get inside as a teacher, someone they would trust. She looked meaningfully at Margaret. All eyes turned to her. Margaret felt her stomach drop. You want me to infiltrate the school? You are white. You speak perfect English. You could claim to be a missionary or a teacher who wants to help civilize the poor savages. Kimimela's voice was bitter. They would believe you because you look like them. It is too dangerous, Nako said immediately. If they discover she is with us. They won't, Margaret interrupted, her mind already racing. They don't know me. I could say I'm newly arrived from back east, that I heard about the school and wanted to help. I could get inside, earn their trust, and then, she looked at Ahiga. Could we stage a fire? Something to create chaos? If all the guards were distracted, I could get the children out during the confusion. Ahiga stroked his jaw thoughtfully. It could work, but you would be alone among enemies. If anything went wrong, we could not rescue you quickly. I know. Margaret felt Nako's hand tighten on hers. But those children are suffering. Every day we delay is another day of beatings and forced conversion and cultural erasure. I have to try. The council debated long into the night. Finally, Ahiga nodded. We will do this, but carefully. Margaret goes in as a teacher. She observes, learns their routines, earns trust. When she sends the signal, we create a diversion. But she has 1 month only. If it cannot be done by then, she comes home and we find another way. 1 month to save 20 children. Margaret felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. That night, as she lay in Nako's arms, she felt him trembling. What is it? She asked softly. I am afraid, he admitted. Not of dying. I have accepted that possibility long ago, but of losing you, of watching you walk into danger and being unable to protect you. Margaret turned to face him. You're not supposed to protect me, Nako. You're supposed to stand beside me. There's a difference. I know that here, he touched his head, but here, he placed her hand over his heart. I am terrified. Good, she said softly. Fear means it matters. If you weren't afraid, it would mean you didn't care. She kissed him gently. I promise I'll come back to you. I'll do this thing, free those children, and come home. Trust me. Before the storm breaks, you'll trust the strength of my hands. He quoted her words back to her. That is what you told me during the thunderstorm. Now I must trust the strength of your heart. It is harder than I thought. They held each other through the night, both knowing that dawn would bring separation and danger, both trying to memorize the feel of each other's heartbeat, just in case. When morning came, Margaret, dressed in her old clothes, the tattered remains of her civilized life, carefully preserved. She pinned her hair up in the white woman style, scrubbed the sun darkness from her skin as much as possible, and transformed herself back into something she'd hoped never to be again. When she looked in the polished metal mirror Masca brought her, a stranger stared back. Prim, proper, and pale. Everything the Apache had helped her move beyond. "I hate this," she muttered. "You look like you did when you arrived," Nako said from behind her. "Except now I can see the difference. Then you were broken. Now you are just disguised." She turned to him. "If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. You are the smartest, strongest, most stubborn woman I have ever known. You will save those children, and then you will come home to me." His voice was firm, but his eyes betrayed his fear. Margaret pulled him close one last time. "I love you," she whispered. "More than I thought possible. More than is probably wise." "Love is never wise," he replied. "That is what makes it worth everything." They parted at the canyon's edge, Margaret riding towards civilization, while Nako watched from the shadows. She didn't look back, knowing if she did, she might lose her courage entirely. The boarding school's administrator, a narrow-faced man named Reverend Whitmore, was delighted to receive her application. "Providence has sent you, Miss Hayes," he said, eyeing her respectable dress and earnest expression. "We are desperately short-staffed, and you come with such excellent references." The references were forged, created by a sympathetic white missionary Ahiga knew who disagreed with the boarding school system. But Whitmore didn't question them. "You'll be teaching basic literacy and arithmetic," he continued, "and of course, proper Christian values. These children are little better than animals, Miss Hayes. It's our duty to save their souls, even if we must break their spirits to do so." Margaret forced herself to smile, even as rage burned in her gut. "Of course, Reverend. I'm eager to begin God's work." She moved into a small room adjoining the children's dormitory that night. Through the thin walls, she could hear crying, the sound of children whispering in forbidden Apache, the sharp voice of a matron telling them to be silent. This would be the longest month of her life. But she would endure it. She would save them. She had promised. "You're bleeding," he said one evening, taking her torn hands in his. She'd been working with prickly pear pads all day. "It's nothing," Margaret insisted, but he was already reaching for salve. As he tenderly dressed her wounds, she studied his face in the firelight. "Do you ever regret bringing me here? I'm not making it easy for you with the tribe." "Easy has never interested me." Nako met her eyes. "You have tried harder to fit into our world than any white person I have known. My people see this. The ones who matter see your heart. And the ones who don't matter will learn, or they will stay angry. Either way, it does not change what we are to each other." He finished with her hands and pulled her close. "You are mine, Margaret Hayes. Mine to protect, mine to stand beside, mine to love. And I am yours, in all the same ways." She kissed him softly. "Together." "Together," he agreed. Their peace was shattered one morning when soldiers arrived at the camp's edge. Margaret watched from inside her dwelling as Ahiga went out to parley, Nako at his side. "We're looking for a white woman," the lieutenant called out. "Margaret Hayes, widow of Thomas Hayes. We have information she's being held captive." Margaret stepped out before anyone could stop her. I'm Margaret Hayes. I'm not being held captive. The lieutenant's eyes widened at her appearance. Dressed in Apache clothing, her skin bronzed by the sun, standing taller than most of the men present. Ma'am, we're here to rescue you. I don't need rescuing, Lieutenant. I'm here by choice. Ma'am, you don't understand the danger. I understand perfectly. Margaret's voice carried across the camp. I understand I found a home here after losing everything. I understand these people treated me with more respect and kindness than I ever received in white society. I understand I'm staying. There's a substantial inheritance waiting for you. The lieutenant tried again. Your husband had a life insurance policy you weren't aware of. $10,000. Enough to start fresh anywhere you want. Margaret's breath caught. $10,000. It was a fortune. Enough to buy land, build a ranch, live in comfort for decades. She could return to civilization, to safety, to a life where she wouldn't constantly have to prove herself. She felt Nako's eyes on her, though he said nothing. The choice had to be hers alone. Keep the money, she said finally, or donate it to widows who need it. I have everything I want right here. The lieutenant looked baffled. Ma'am, I must insist. You can insist all you like, but I'm not leaving. Margaret moved to stand beside Nako, taking his hand openly. This is my home. These are my people. And this is the man I love. Now please leave before this becomes a confrontation no one wants. After the soldiers departed, the camp erupted in discussion. Maska approached Margaret with tears in her eyes. You gave up great wealth for us, for him. Gold isn't what I need, Margaret said, echoing words Nako had once spoken to her. This life is what I need. That night, Ahiga called the tribe together. Margaret Hayes has proven her loyalty beyond question. She will be given a name in our language and welcomed as one of our own. The naming ceremony was simple but profound. As the tribe watched, Ahiga placed his hands on Margaret's shoulders. From this day forward, you will be known as Hesea, she who rises. For you have risen above your past, risen above your pain. Risen to meet every challenge we placed before you. You are Apache now, and you are home. Margaret Hesea felt tears stream down her face as the tribe's voices rose in acceptance. When she turned to Nako, she found him smiling with a pride and love that made her heart soar. Later, as they lay together under blankets, Nako traced the line of her jaw. Before the storm breaks, you'll trust the strength of my hands, he said softly. Do you remember? Those words you spoke to me when the great thunderstorm came last month. Margaret smiled at the memory. They'd been caught far from camp when the storm hit, and she'd been terrified as lightning split the sky. Nako had taken her hands, and she'd forced herself to be calm, to trust him. I remember. I was so scared. But you trusted me. You have taught me something, Hesea. You have taught me that strength is not just in weapons or in battle. Strength is in choosing to love again when love has destroyed you. Strength is in building a new life from the ashes of the old. He kissed her forehead. You are the strongest person I know. Only because you showed me how, she whispered. 6 months later, they were married in both Apache tradition and in a ceremony that honored Margaret's Christian background, presided over by a traveling minister who'd heard their story and insisted on blessing their union. Margaret wore a doeskin dress decorated with beads and shells, her hair braided with wildflowers. Nako wore his finest clothing, his long hair loose and gleaming in the sunlight. As they stood before the tribe and the minister, hands clasped, Margaret thought of Thomas and of Nako's first family. She sent them a silent thank you for loving, for teaching, for letting go so that new love could grow. Do you, Margaret Hosea Hayes, take this man as your husband? The minister asked. I do, she said clearly. For all my days in this world and the next. And do you, Nako, take this woman as your wife? Nako's voice rang out strong. She is already part of my soul. Now I make it official before God and man. Yes, I take her. Always. When they kissed, the tribe erupted in celebration that lasted well into the night. There was food and dancing, stories and laughter. Maska pulled Margaret into a tight embrace. My son lives again because of you, she whispered. You have given our family back its heart. He gave me mine first, Margaret replied. As the celebration wound down, Nako led Margaret away from the fires to a high ridge overlooking the valley. Stars blazed overhead, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small bundle from his belt. When he unwrapped it, Margaret gasped. It was a necklace of silver and turquoise, exquisitely crafted. I traded for months to get this, Nako explained as he fastened it around her neck. The silver is from the sky, fallen as a meteor. The turquoise is from the earth. Together, they represent our love, something that fell from the heavens and took root in the ground, eternal. Margaret touched the stones reverently. It's beautiful, but you didn't need to. Yes, I did. He cupped her face in both hands. You gave up everything for me. Your people, your inheritance, your old life. This is such a small thing compared to that gift. You gave me everything that matters, Margaret countered. You gave me myself back, the woman I was always meant to be, but never had permission to become. They stood in silence for a moment, looking out over the land that had become their home. Then Nako spoke quietly. There will be hard times ahead. The soldiers will come again. The government wants all Apache on reservations. We may have to fight, or we may have to run. This peace we have now, it cannot last forever. Then we'll face what comes together, Margaret said firmly. Storm or calm, war or peace, together. That's all I need to know. Together, Nako agreed, pulling her close, always together. As they descended the ridge to rejoin their celebration, Margaret looked back at the stars once more. She thought of the frightened, desperate woman who'd collapsed in a canyon months ago, ready to trade her wedding ring for water. That woman was gone, transformed by love and hardship into someone stronger, someone who belonged. She thought of the title people would give her story if they ever heard it, the giant widow who'd found love with an Apache warrior. But she knew the truth was simpler and more profound than any title could capture. She'd found herself. Everything else had simply followed. Years later, when soldiers finally forced the tribe onto a reservation, Margaret and Nako stood side by side, refusing to be separated. When an overzealous officer tried to remove her to the white section, Margaret's height and strength proved useful in unexpected ways. She simply picked up the startled man and set him aside. I am Apache, she said calmly. Hosea, she who rises, and I'm not going anywhere without my family. The officer, outmatched and embarrassed, relented. On the reservation, life was hard. Food was scarce, disease rampant, freedom a distant memory. But Margaret and Nako held their small piece of earth and made it home. They raised crops, taught children, and kept their culture alive in quiet ways the soldiers couldn't stamp out. Margaret bore 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. Each was tall like their mother, with their father's dark eyes and fierce spirit. She told them stories of the old days, of the canyon where she'd met their father, of storms weathered and love found in impossible places. "Your mother is the bravest person I know," Nako would tell them as they sat around evening fires. "She chose a harder road because it led to a truer life. Never forget that courage sometimes means walking away from comfort toward the unknown." In their twilight years, when both were gray and weathered like the rocks they'd first met among, Margaret and Nako would sit outside their small home and watch sunsets paint the desert in impossible colors. "Do you ever regret it?" Nako asked one evening. "Giving up that money, that easier life?" Margaret took his hand, fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "Not for a single moment. That life would have been hollow. This life, hard as it's been, has been real. It's been mine, ours." "Together," Nako said as he had 1,000 times before. "Together," Margaret agreed, "until the last star falls." When Nako finally passed, at the age of 73, Margaret held his hand and sang to him in both English and Apache, the languages of their merged lives. His last words were her name, both of them, Margaret and Hosea, the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. She followed him 6 months later, her children and grandchildren surrounding her bed. As she closed her eyes for the last time, she whispered, "Together. Always together." They buried her next to Nako, on a ridge overlooking the valley where they'd built their life. Her gravestone bore both her names and a simple inscription chosen by her children: "She who rose above fear and found love in the storm." And if you visited that grave on certain nights, when the wind howled and thunder rolled across the desert, you might hear what sounded like laughter. Two voices intertwined, eternally young, eternally together, still weathering storms side by side in whatever realm waited beyond this one. Their story became legend among both Apache and white settlers, though each told it differently. But those who knew the truth, their children, their grandchildren, the tribe members who'd witnessed their love, they passed down the real story. Not a tale of savages and civilization, not a romance of rescue and salvation, but something more profound. Two broken people who'd found each other at the edge of despair and built something unbreakable from their shared pain and hope. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the obstacles they'd faced or the prejudices they'd overcome, but the simple truth that love, real love, could take root anywhere, even in the harsh soil of the desert, even between two people the world said should be enemies, even in the eye of a storm that threatened to tear everything apart. Together, they'd proven that the human heart knows no boundaries, acknowledges no divisions, and recognizes no authority but its own fierce beating. Together, they'd risen above everything that tried to keep them apart. Together, they'd lived. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Margaret and Nako's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.